All right, Harry, we got a question from somebody asking, who did Cain marry? First thing first, let's figure out who is Cain and what is he all about. And can you give us a little background on that?
Yeah, and that's a good question because Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, or they weren't in the Garden of Eden, now they were out of the garden, but they were the first two people. They had two sons, Cain and Abel. But things went sideways, and Cain killed his brother Abel, which is really unfortunate. Later on, Seth came along and other ones. But Cain was
He got kicked out, right? He got sent out of the land, and
yeah, and
so that's the question: is like, who did he marry when he got sent out of the land?
that's right. And there's only one option. It says Adam and Eve had other sons and daughters. So he married one of the daughters of Adam and Eve. So
Isn't
that's
that a little bit twisted though, or a little bit wrong? Because if that's really what you're saying is his sister, he
that's right.
married his sister.
That's right. That's right. And in that time, like all of them, like the rest of the family, Seth and other boys, they would all have married sisters. That's the way it would have been. But you say, well, that sounds a little sketchy. And today it very, very much is sketchy. But in those days, it wasn't because Adam and Eve, their genetics were still perfect because God had just made them and so on. Today, people marrying really close relatives, we know that that's not a good deal because the genetic
Disbalance
problem.
is going to happen, right? There's going to be a genetic problem, and it's going to be
Yes.
unfortunate.
But in those days, their genetics were really perfect. Yeah. They claim today's science, I think I have this right, there's supposed to be 2,000 errors come in every generation out of about 4 billion pieces of information in our genetics. So that's a lot, but yet there's a lot of pieces of information. There's about 200 generations we are at now, maybe 250 since Adam and Eve. So it's not thousands of generations; it's a couple hundred generations that we have. So for Cain to marry his sister, by today's standards, that doesn't seem right. But genetics in those days were right on, so it wasn't a problem at all because they were all brand new genetics.
I have
And then
another question. What about Noah, right? We see Noah, and the flood happens with Noah, and there's only a couple of them on the ark, right? What did they do in this case there?
yeah. So Noah's three sons and their wives were there. So their children would be first cousins. Again, the same thing. They would all be marrying first cousins because that's all. Or the choice between sisters and first cousins. So let's go with the first cousins. And so that worked then. And again, the same thing. That's only 10 generations approximately after 10 or 12, maybe after Adam and Eve. So again, genetics are really quite pristine yet.
And then we hear about Abraham, right, and Sarah, and we know that it says that even when he was lying to the Egyptian Pharaoh, he says, "This is my sister," and it's a lie because they're half sisters, but he was really she was his wife. So how did
Yeah,
that work then? Was that normal that at around that time as well?
yeah, it seems like it. Abram married his half sister. Isaac married his first cousin's daughter, and Jacob married two wives, which were both first cousins. So in those days, that was pretty normal. I guess people didn't go as far from home and so on and so forth. Especially, Abram was concerned that he didn't want his son, marrying a sketchy lady from the community.
Yeah,
So
they wanted to keep the bloodline in the family as well, right? Like the prestige aspect of it as well.
well, and that, and also you didn't have all those foreign gods that they were serving, and he wanted to make sure he got himself a good woman, and he did. Rebecca was a wonderful lady, and so that turned out good, and so everything was good.
I have
And
another question. So when did all this seem to start not being normal, or when did God command us or tell us to not participate or practice this tradition anymore?
yeah, so in Moses' time, there was one command that says you're not allowed to marry your half sister or sister, well, sister or half sister anymore. So Leviticus 20, we have that. So there's rules there, and so after that, that had changed. So and then of course today we have rules too. I'm not even sure what they are specifically. I think there are rules about how close a relative you can or can't marry. Of course, those rules maybe don't apply now, nor is it a real concern because that's not really where our society is anyway. But But there were rules, I know, at one time as to what we could or could not do because first cousins today, that's sketchy. Particularly things
Well,
blindness and those kind of things can be a real concern. That's kind of an area that demonstrates itself, and other weaknesses to certain diseases. So, anyways, that's kind of a bit of the history of the early Bible and so on. They say, well, how did this all work? It's not a real spiritual concern, but it's just from a practical standpoint. We
this is how it all started.
how
And
it started.
I have one more last question before we finish up here. Do we read of anybody else in the Bible later on that might have broken one of those rules of God's commands, or not really, do we?
Not that I know of. No,
No,
no.
it's good.
Yeah,
It's
no,
good to
no.
see the way it all transformed. But it logically makes sense that it has to come from one set of family. And as time continues and goes more and more and more, this doesn't apply anymore.
And then, of course, with Moses, Moses gave the people of Israel, this was rules about marrying, but he gave them a ton of rules which were all focused on good, healthy living, the foods you shouldn't eat, and the rules for this and rules for that, how to take care of slaves and wives and children and all behavior and so on. So there was a lot of rules in the days of Moses. In the times of Jesus, he was still encouraging those behaviors, but the problem is there were a lot of traditions that crept in, and they were favoring the traditions over the rules. But anyways, Moses gave us the rules, and then that's where the Ten Commandments came in. But Jesus rejigged them and came up with a new set of rules that were, more heart oriented than rule oriented.
Awesome. And thanks for that, Harry.
Thank you.